The sun rose slowly over United States Naval Academy, reflecting gold on the water and illuminating the perfectly trimmed lawns. Flags fluttered in the gentle breeze as families, officers, and guests arrived, their eyes bright with anticipation. Inside the grand ceremonial hall, every inch of polished brass, marble floors, and sparkling chandeliers gleamed under the soft morning light. The hall smelled faintly of fresh flowers, waxed floors, and the crisp, clean scent of starched uniforms. Rows of white-coated Navy officers, their medals catching glints of sunlight, lined the aisles. Families shuffled in, their children clinging to parents' hands, craning to see the stage where heroes of the United States Navy would be honored. Cameras clicked and whispered conversations rippled across the room, a mix of pride, excitement, and solemn respect. Everyone's attention was on the podium, where the ceremony was about to begin. Among them, standing at the center aisle with a presence that commanded the room, was Vice Admiral Nathaniel Reeves. A three-star admiral, he was known across the Navy for his composure in battle, his decisiveness, and his unwavering sense of duty. His uniform was immaculate, medals perfectly aligned, and his gaze calm but penetrating. Reeves had attended hundreds of ceremonies, witnessed countless promotions and commendations, yet today his eyes were locked on a single detail. As the musicians began the national anthem, the room rose in unison. Families placed hands over hearts. Officers stood tall, posture rigid, eyes forward. The anthem soared, filling the cavernous hall with notes of pride and solemnity. When the final chord faded, the crowd sat, everyone, that is, except Vice Admiral Reeves. He remained standing, rigid, silent, as if rooted to the spot. His gaze swept the front row, scanning each polished chair, each uniform, each family, smiling in quiet anticipation. And then he saw it. A single chair, empty, stark against the otherwise perfectly aligned seating. It had a small brass plaque at its base, engraved with a name: Chief Petty Officer Daniel "Danny" Mercer. Mercer was supposed to sit there, honored for his valor and his sacrifices. He had been selected for one of the highest commendations possible, a recognition reserved for those who had faced extraordinary danger and made impossible choices to save others. And yet the chair was empty. A ripple of unease passed through Reeves' mind. He knew that absence wasn't random. His heart tightened. There was no accident here, not in a ceremony this meticulously planned. Every detail had been accounted for, every schedule rehearsed down to the second. This empty chair screamed of a story untold, of tension hidden behind polished smiles. Reeves' mind drifted briefly to the past, to the mission that had made Mercer a hero, and simultaneously placed him under scrutiny. Years ago, in a conflict overseas, a small Navy Marine operation had gone catastrophically wrong. Faulty intelligence had led them into a heavily fortified zone. Explosions had rocked the ground beneath their feet. Gunfire had echoed endlessly, and chaos had consumed the battlefield. Communication lines had been severed, and commands had become fragmented, leaving the team stranded in the open. Amid the chaos, Mercer had volunteered to go back into the heart of the danger to disarm explosives and rescue trapped Marines. Reeves had ordered a tactical retreat, believing the situation to be unsalvageable. Mercer had refused. He went in anyway, crawling over rubble and fire to pull men to safety. 12 Marines survived because of him. 3 did not. Official reports had praised Mercer for his heroism, but whispered criticisms followed behind closed doors. Disobedience, some said. Risking lives unnecessarily, others claimed. Yet those who had been saved told a different story of a man who faced impossible odds, acting decisively when no one else could. Reeves' eyes returned to the empty chair. His thoughts raced. Why was Mercer absent today? Was he detained, injured, or something worse? He scanned the faces in the audience, looking for a clue, a sign, a whispered explanation. Staff officers murmured quietly, unaware that the man in front of them, the one who could command fleets and make life-and-death decisions with a single word, was now frozen with concern, a rare and dangerous combination of fear and certainty in his gaze. He remembered the countless nights spent in war rooms and command centers, making split-second decisions that determined life or death. But no training, no battle experience, had prepared him for the gut-wrenching feeling of an absence in the front row during a ceremony meant to honor a man whose courage he had witnessed firsthand. As the master of ceremonies called the next honoree, Reeves did not sit. Whispers began among the attendees. Why is the Admiral standing? Did something happen to Chief Mercer? Is this part of the protocol? Cameras flashed discreetly, capturing the anomaly. For once, tradition had failed to dictate behavior. Reeves' focus was singular. He allowed himself a brief recollection. The fire, the smoke, the chaos of that overseas mission. The screams of Marines trapped behind debris. The sight of Mercer crawling into the danger zone, his movements calm and deliberate despite the chaos around him. Reeves had given the order to retreat, knowing it was the safest command. But Mercer had chosen courage, even at risk of insubordination. And for that choice, he now sat at the center of controversy. Reeves' jaw tightened. He realized something important. Today's ceremony would not proceed as usual. This empty chair was more than a physical absence. It was a challenge to every tradition, every expectation, every meticulously planned protocol in the room. He would need to act. He would need to speak. He would need to stand, not because it was proper, but because someone had sacrificed everything for the country, and someone had to honor that truth, regardless of consequences. And so, Vice Admiral Nathaniel Reeves remained standing, eyes locked on the empty chair, the rest of the hall unaware that the day had shifted from celebration to reckoning. The ceremony, the speeches, the medals, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the man who should have been there, and the story that refused to stay silent. Vice Admiral Reeves could feel the weight of the empty chair like a physical presence. Every eye in the room was focused on the stage, yet none could see the story he carried in his mind. Chief Petty Officer Daniel "Danny" Mercer was more than a name on the program. He was the embodiment of courage under fire, the kind of man who made decisions that ordinary sailors could not even imagine. And yet today, he was missing. Mercer's absence gnawed at Reeves. He remembered the mission as though it had happened yesterday. The smoke, the chaos, the cries for help over the roar of gunfire. It had been an operation far beyond normal risk, a routine patrol that escalated into a life-or-death struggle in a foreign theater. A small Marine-Navy joint team, sent to secure a strategic position along a hostile coastline, had been ambushed unexpectedly. They were outnumbered, trapped, and communication lines had failed. Orders were unclear. Reeves, overseeing the mission from the command center, had instructed a retreat. It was the safest choice for most, the one that preserved lives when the odds were stacked against them. But Mercer had refused. Without hesitation, he had crawled through fire and debris to reach trapped Marines. Explosions had rained around him, shrapnel slicing through the air. He moved with calm precision, focused on saving lives while his comrades were forced back by his superior officer's caution. 12 Marines survived because of him, 3 did not. Officially, the records painted a careful picture. Mercer had acted heroically but outside orders, a phrase that did little justice to the raw bravery displayed in the smoke and chaos of that night. Privately, however, whispers circulated throughout the ranks. Some questioned his actions as insubordination. Others quietly called him a hero. Reeves had carried that duality in his mind for years, pride and regret intermingled, the memory of that night haunting him more than any other mission. And now here he was, at a ceremony meant to honor that same bravery, and the man himself was not present. The audience, oblivious to the tension building in Reeves' chest, applauded another honoree. Medals glinted as hands shook, cameras flashed, and voices echoed in polite congratulations. Families leaned forward, smiling proudly. The ceremony was proceeding flawlessly, a testament to tradition, precision, and meticulous planning. But to Reeves, none of it mattered. His focus was solely on that empty chair. He scanned the room subtly, noting the reactions of those around him. Junior officers glanced at him with curiosity, some with uncertainty. Protocol demanded deference, yet the Admiral remained standing. Even the most seasoned officers seemed hesitant to approach or question him. Reeves' mind raced. Why was Mercer absent? Was he ill? Was there an accident? Or had something more sinister occurred? A brief memory flickered through Reeves' mind, the night of the mission replayed in vivid detail. He remembered Mercer's determined movements, his refusal to leave his comrades behind, and the precise calm that had guided every decision. There had been a moment when Reeves had considered radioing him to abort the mission. He hadn't. It had been the right decision, he reasoned at the time, the only decision he could make with incomplete information. Yet now, years later, the repercussions of that choice were resurfacing in the form of a missing hero at a ceremony that should have celebrated him. The program listed Mercer as a recipient of one of the highest commendations in the Navy, a recognition usually reserved for valor under extraordinary circumstances. Reeves had personally approved the recommendation, convinced that Mercer's courage transcended bureaucratic hesitation. And yet, the empty chair challenged everything Reeves believed about honor, recognition, and the Navy itself. He allowed himself a brief glance at the families in attendance. Mothers clutched children's hands, fathers straightened shoulders in pride. Officers exchanged polite nods and whispered congratulations. To them, this was a day of celebration. To Reeves, it was a reminder that not all battles ended on the field. Some were fought quietly in hallways, offices, and behind locked doors. Reeves' thoughts returned to Mercer. He remembered the younger sailor's unwavering dedication, the way he had shielded others, the sacrifices he had made quietly without seeking acknowledgement. He recalled the bravery that had defined the man, not just in that one mission but throughout his career. And now, for reasons unknown, the Navy's own system had failed to bring him to the place where he belonged, to the front of the hall, under the gaze of peers, family, and leaders who had come to honor his service. A whisper from an aide reached Reeves' ear, subtle and almost lost in the ceremony's noise. "Sir, we've received word from the Pentagon." Reeves' chest tightened. He did not need to hear more to understand what it might mean. Detainment. Investigation. Something politically motivated, perhaps, designed to challenge Mercer's honor or to protect the hierarchy that often overshadowed individual heroism. The room continued its orderly procession of awards. Reeves' presence remained a silent disruption. Every eye now noticed the standing Admiral, the unusual defiance of protocol. Questions began to ripple subtly through the crowd. He could feel the tension shift, almost electrically, as though the entire ceremony was holding its collective breath. Then Reeves made a decision. He would not allow this story, Mercer's story, to be diminished or buried beneath bureaucracy, political maneuvering, or oversight. The ceremony, intended to celebrate bravery, would not continue without acknowledgement of the truth. Not this time. He tightened his jaw, adjusted his posture, and prepared to act. This day, he realized, would not be remembered for the medals, the speeches, or the applause. It would be remembered for one simple, unyielding fact. Honor could not wait for permission, and courage could not be ignored, not when it demanded recognition in the empty chair before him. And with that resolve, Reeves' eyes returned once more to the front row. The chair remained empty. The moment stretched taut, pregnant with anticipation. Somewhere beyond the doors of the Naval Academy, a storm was gathering, one that would change the course of the ceremony, and the Navy's understanding of heroism forever. The ceremony continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in Vice Admiral Reeves' mind. Guests applauded politely as another officer accepted a commendation, medals gleaming under the chandeliers. Families smiled, children fidgeted in their seats, officers exchanged handshakes, and the room carried on in perfect, disciplined harmony. Yet Reeves' focus remained fixed on the empty chair at the front. Every second that passed without Mercer's arrival tightened the knot of unease in his chest. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the air, a subtle tension that no uniform or polished floor could hide. Then, just as the master of ceremonies began to call the next honoree, Reeves' aide approached quietly, bending low to speak without drawing attention. "Sir," he whispered, handing over a secure phone, "you need to see this." Reeves took it in his hand, his fingers steady despite the sudden surge of anxiety. The screen glowed with a single, brief message. "Chief Petty Officer Daniel Mercer has been detained pending investigation." For a heartbeat, Reeves simply stared. His chest tightened, and a low, cold realization settled deep in his gut. The mission from years ago, the one he had buried under commendations, medals, and classified files, was now under scrutiny again. Someone, somewhere, had reopened the case, challenging the honor of the very man who had risked everything to save others. Reeves' mind raced. Who could have triggered this? Why now? The timing was precise, almost cruel, just days before the ceremony meant to publicly honor Mercer's bravery. The questions formed in his mind faster than he could answer them. Was Mercer being punished for heroism? Was this political? Was someone trying to protect themselves by tarnishing his record? His thoughts involuntarily drifted back to that night, replaying the chaos as if he were there again. Smoke thick as clouds hung low over the battlefield. Gunfire echoed like thunder. Explosions tore through the ground, hurling shrapnel and dust into the air. Marines screamed from behind rubble, trapped in pockets of danger, while others retreated toward safer ground. Communications had been cut, leaving Reeves' orders to retreat hanging in fragmented silence across radios. And then there was Mercer. Reeves could see him again, crawling across the debris-strewn ground, moving with calm, terrifying precision through chaos that would paralyze any ordinary man. His focus was singular: reach the Marines, save their lives, return safely. His courage was not reckless but measured, deliberate, and utterly selfless. 12 Marines survived that night because of him. 3 did not. Official reports had framed his actions as unorthodox and outside protocol, but Reeves had never believed Mercer had done wrong. Every instinct in him screamed that this sailor had done exactly what was needed, when no one else had the courage to act. Now, the Navy's bureaucracy and a sudden investigation threatened to undo everything, reducing a hero's valor to lines on a document and whispers in back offices. Reeves glanced at the audience. They continued their polite applause, unaware of the tension quietly consuming him. Families leaned forward, expecting a ceremony that celebrated courage. Officers exchanged whispers, oblivious to the story unfolding in Reeves' mind. The hall carried on, orderly and precise, yet it was all fragile, a veneer that could crack at any moment if the truth were revealed. He clenched his jaw, realizing that this was no longer just about Mercer. It was about honor, integrity, and leadership. If the Navy allowed a hero to be publicly questioned or shamed without cause, it would send a chilling message to every sailor about the cost of courage, and Reeves would not stand for it. Even as he considered his next move, Reeves allowed himself a brief recollection. The moment he realized Mercer had disobeyed his order to retreat. For a moment, fear had gripped him, the gut-twisting fear that someone might not make it out alive. But then he had watched the younger man act decisively, navigating danger with precision, courage, and selflessness. The memory was so vivid, so piercing, that it felt as though he were witnessing it in real time, smoke still curling, the acrid scent of explosives still in the air, and every decision weighing life and death in the balance. A subtle murmur reached Reeves' ears. Officers whispered, trying to guess why he remained standing. Cameras, unnoticed until now, had begun to focus on him. The empty chair was impossible to ignore. Every eye eventually gravitated toward it. The tension in the room grew almost palpable, as if the silence itself demanded acknowledgement. Reeves realized then that he faced a choice: follow protocol, sit, and let Mercer's absence pass as a minor disruption, or act, disrupt the ceremony, draw attention, and defend the man who had risked everything. His decision would reverberate far beyond the hall. He took a steadying breath, heart pounding but mind clear. The ceremony was no longer just a formal event. It was the stage upon which truth, honor, and courage would either be validated or ignored, and Reeves was the one who would decide to make them known. He let his gaze linger on the empty chair for a long moment. Every polished uniform, every applauding family, every shining medal faded into the background. All that mattered was the man who should have been there, and the truth that demanded acknowledgement. Somewhere, beyond the walls of the Naval Academy, the gears of bureaucracy were turning. Someone had made a call. Someone had opened an investigation. But Reeves knew that the story of Mercer's heroism was stronger than any file or report. The question now was whether anyone else would recognize it, and whether he was willing to stand alone to ensure it did. The hall continued its orderly flow of speeches and awards, but Reeves' mind had already left it. He had begun calculating the next steps. The empty chair, once unnoticed, had become the center of the room, the focal point of an unfolding drama that threatened to shake the Navy's understanding of honor, and Reeves was ready to confront it head-on. The first spark of confrontation had been lit. The hall remained a picture of polished decorum, but the atmosphere had shifted imperceptibly, like the calm before a storm. Families sat quietly, applauding at routine intervals, officers nodded and whispered with curiosity, and the master of ceremonies continued reading names from the program. Yet Vice Admiral Nathaniel Reeves remained standing. His eyes were fixed on the empty chair that symbolized both heroism and injustice. He could feel the tension around him, the subtle stares, the questions forming in the minds of officers and families alike. This was no longer a simple ceremony. This was a reckoning. Reeves' jaw tightened. Protocol demanded that he sit. Every military tradition, every expectation, every ingrained sense of decorum screamed at him to return to his seat. Yet, standing there, he understood a fundamental truth. No ceremony, no protocol could honor the man who deserved it if he remained silent. Daniel Mercer had risked his life repeatedly for his comrades, for the Navy, for his country. And now, bureaucracy and hidden investigations threatened to diminish that courage. Reeves could not let it happen. As the next honoree's name was called, a subtle hush passed over the audience. Eyes began to drift toward Reeves. Murmurs rose quietly among junior officers and families alike. "Why isn't the Admiral sitting?" one whispered. Another shook his head in disbelief, wondering whether this breach of protocol was deliberate or the sign of some unseen emergency. Cameras in the hall shifted focus, capturing the lone figure who refused to follow the expected path. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Reeves weighed his options carefully. If he acted without invitation, without authorization, he could face immediate reprimand or even career-ending consequences. Yet nothing he had ever learned, no battle, no order, no training, mattered more than standing for what was right. And this was right. He could no longer allow Mercer's heroism to be overshadowed by investigation, delay, or fear. Not here. Not now. He straightened his shoulders, exhaling slowly. With deliberate steps, Reeves moved toward the podium. The sound of his polished shoes echoed across the hall, breaking the murmured whispers into silence. Every head turned instinctively. Families paused mid-applause. Officers' hands froze halfway in handshakes. The room, so carefully orchestrated, had fractured in an instant. Here was an admiral defying protocol in plain sight, a figure of authority and discipline taking an unexpected stand, literally. Reeves approached the microphone and paused. He allowed the silence to linger, letting the weight of the moment settle on everyone present. Cameras focused, pens scribbled, and the ambient noise of polite applause dissipated into nothing. Then he spoke. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Mercer was not just a sailor. "He is a hero," Reeves began, his voice calm, steady, and resolute. "Years ago, during a mission that went catastrophically wrong, he chose to act when others were forced to retreat. 12 Marines survived because of him. 3 lives were lost, and yet his actions saved countless others." Gasps swept through the hall. Families exchanged startled glances, officers stiffened, and whispers began again. Reeves ignored them all. He continued. The official reports may describe him as acting outside orders. Some may even label his actions as disobedience. But I was there. I gave the order to withdraw, and it was his courage, his initiative, and his selflessness that saved lives. A few officers shifted uncomfortably. None could contradict a three-star admiral speaking from the podium, yet his words challenged the very framework of military discipline and protocol. The hall's atmosphere thickened, tension pressing against every shoulder and jaw. Reeves spoke not as a superior merely reciting formalities, but as a man willing to stake his authority and reputation on the truth. I will say it clearly. If there was failure during that mission, it was mine, not his. And Chief Mercer deserves the recognition that this ceremony and this Navy was meant to give him. Reeves' voice resonated through the hall, carrying the weight of authority, conviction, and moral clarity. The murmurs grew louder, now punctuated by audible reactions from family members and junior officers alike. Cameras snapped relentlessly, capturing the rare image of an admiral publicly challenging perception and defending a subordinate in front of hundreds. The empty chair at the front of the room suddenly seemed to command the attention of everyone present, not as a vacancy, but as a symbol of heroism overlooked, waiting to be acknowledged. Reeves paused, letting his words sink in. He glanced at the back of the hall where the most senior officers sat, eyes narrowing slightly, restrained tension in their postures. He understood that some would consider this insubordination, a breach of tradition, or even recklessness. But Reeves had made his choice. He would not let fear of rebuke silence him. He would not let Mercer's valor be questioned while truth went unspoken. The master of ceremonies faltered briefly, realizing that the carefully scheduled event had been disrupted by the admiral's decision. Reeves ignored protocol entirely, reciting details of the mission, of Mercer's actions, and of the lives saved. Every sentence reinforced his conviction. Heroism would not be buried in bureaucratic hesitation or hidden investigations. By the time Reeves finished, a charged silence had fallen over the hall. Families stared in awe, officers whispered among themselves, and the cameras recorded every moment. For the first time that day, the empty chair felt like it had purpose, a silent demand for acknowledgement, truth, and justice. Reeves stepped back, maintaining his stance, unyielding, as if daring the room to ignore what had just been said. In that moment, Vice Admiral Nathaniel Reeves knew that the ceremony would never be the same. The room, once orderly and predictable, had been transformed into a space where courage and truth demanded recognition, regardless of risk, tradition, or expectation. The first step toward justice had been taken. And the empty chair remained, a silent, powerful statement that the story was far from over. The echoes of Vice Admiral Reeves' words lingered in the Grand Hall long after he stepped down from the podium. Families, officers, and guests had initially been startled by his defiance of protocol, but as the truth sank in, a ripple of admiration and awe swept through the audience. Children whispered to their parents, officers exchanged uncertain nods, and a few sailors in the back rows quietly murmured their agreement. The empty chair at the front of the hall had become more than just a vacancy. It had transformed into a symbol of courage, heroism, and the cost of standing up for what is right. Within hours, the recording of Reeves' impromptu speech was circulating through secure Navy channels, reaching officers and personnel who could not attend the ceremony. Analysts debated his actions feverishly. Was it reckless, a breach of protocol, or was it the purest form of leadership, a defense of a man who risked everything for others? Some senior officers privately feared the consequences, anticipating calls from higher authorities, potential reprimands, or political backlash. Others quietly admired the admiral's courage, recognizing that speaking the truth was often more dangerous than following orders. At the United States Department of Defense, the reaction was swift and tense. Senior officials convened emergency calls, whispering in secure offices about the implications of Reeves' public statements. Admirals were expected to uphold tradition and maintain institutional discipline. Confessing fault publicly and defending a subordinate under investigation went against every unwritten rule. This could set a precedent, one official warned. The chain of command could be undermined. The Navy cannot appear divided. Meanwhile, whispers within the hall had turned into quiet campaigns of support for Chief Petty Officer Mercer. Marines who had served alongside him began contacting colleagues, sharing stories of his bravery, his decisive actions, and his unwavering loyalty. A retired officer posted a message on a secure forum praising Mercer's heroism, and it quickly spread among enlisted personnel. The narrative that had once questioned Mercer's judgment began to shift. People remembered the lives he had saved, not the bureaucratic technicalities. Reeves remained at his post, eyes still on the empty chair as he absorbed the weight of the moment. He had expected scrutiny, perhaps even disapproval, but the groundswell of support was unexpected. Sailors and Marines who had served alongside Mercer knew the truth. They had witnessed courage and selflessness firsthand. The truth was on their side, and it was beginning to seep outward into the wider military community. But the fallout was not limited to admiration. Within hours, Reeves received a secure message from the Chief of Naval Operations. The language was polite but firm: retract your statements or face an official review. There would be consequences, the message implied, for publicly contradicting protocol and challenging the perception of authority. Reeves' chest tightened. He had anticipated this. He had known that truth could be politically inconvenient, that protecting a subordinate could put his own career at risk. But he also knew that failing to act would betray everything he believed about leadership, courage, and honor. As he walked slowly out of the ceremony hall, aides moved cautiously around him, aware that his words had shifted the atmosphere entirely. The applause that had once been polite and ceremonial now carried a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Families looked on, some curious, others confused, but all aware that something extraordinary had just occurred. The media present captured images that would be disseminated across military publications and eventually to broader audiences. The message was clear. Reeves had chosen truth over protocol, and he had done so for a man whose courage could not be ignored. Back at the Pentagon, officers reviewed video footage of the ceremony in real time. The empty chair, highlighted by Reeves' defiance, dominated the frame. Analysts debated the implications. Could an admiral act unilaterally to defend a subordinate? Did this constitute insubordination, or was it an exemplary display of moral courage? Opinions were divided, but one thing was undeniable. The Navy had witnessed something unusual, something that would be discussed for years to come. Meanwhile, Marines and sailors who had been rescued by Mercer began submitting letters, statements, and personal testimonies defending him. One by one, their voices added weight to the narrative Reeves had delivered publicly. These accounts were meticulous, heartfelt, and unwavering. They recounted the chaos of that distant mission, the split-second decisions, and the selflessness that had defined Mercer's actions. Each story reinforced the truth Reeves had spoken on the podium. Mercer's heroism could not be diminished by paperwork, politics, or time. By the evening, the story had gained momentum. Secure military communications carried the footage, commentary, and personal testimonies across multiple branches. Officers debated quietly in mess halls, sailors discussed the events in barracks, and social media forums among military families lit up with discussions about courage, leadership, and loyalty. Mercer's absence, once a source of tension and speculation, had become a catalyst for recognition and solidarity. Reeves, however, knew that the battle was far from over. While public opinion within the ranks leaned in Mercer's favor, the formal investigation still loomed. Papers would be filed. Calls would be made. Decisions could go against them at any moment. But one thing was certain: the narrative had shifted. Truth was gaining momentum, and courage, once overlooked, was now undeniable. The empty chair continued to dominate Reeves' attention, symbolizing the stakes, the heroism, and the injustice that had nearly gone unnoticed. He realized that he had set in motion a chain of events that could either redeem Mercer completely or, if mishandled, create scandal. Either way, the story had taken on a life of its own. As night fell over the academy, the hall emptied, but the reverberations of Reeves' actions echoed far beyond its walls. Conversations, opinions, and tensions carried on long into the evening. The stage had been set, the battlefield of bureaucracy and honor laid bare, and at the center of it all, the empty chair waited, silent but commanding, for the truth to finally take its place. The first wave of shockwaves had hit. More were coming. The morning after the ceremony, Vice Admiral Reeves woke to a flurry of secure messages. The Navy's internal networks were buzzing with commentary, speculations, and the inevitable political scrutiny. Even as the public support for Mercer grew, the investigation against him had not been dropped. Reeves knew that appearances were only half the battle. Bureaucratic inertia could erase heroism as easily as it documented it. Someone needed to ensure that truth prevailed, and Reeves would not allow Mercer's actions to be misrepresented. In a quiet office at the Naval Operations Center, a young analyst named Lieutenant Jasmine Carter pored over mission archives, unaware of the storm her discovery was about to unleash. She had been reviewing declassified materials related to the mission where Mercer had risked everything. Files were incomplete, reports scattered across multiple departments, and some evidence had never been cross-referenced. While sifting through helmet camera recordings, Carter noticed something previously overlooked. One recording from the night of the mission clearly captured Mercer moving toward the trapped Marines while simultaneously communicating with command. The audio was distorted, static crackled over the signal, but there was a critical detail. Mercer asked for permission before returning to the danger zone. No response denying his actions could be heard. Carter alerted Reeves immediately. Within minutes, the Admiral was watching the footage on a secure monitor. The scene replayed with haunting clarity, smoke curling around jagged ruins, explosions punctuating the night, and Mercer, moving with calm precision, assisting injured Marines, guiding them to safety while signaling to his superiors. Reeves' jaw tightened as he watched. The evidence was undeniable. Mercer had not recklessly disobeyed orders. He had acted decisively in chaos, when communications failed and lives were at stake. Reeves leaned back in his chair, absorbing the weight of the moment. This footage could overturn months of speculation and potentially vindicate Mercer completely. Yet it also risked exposing flaws in command decisions, miscommunications, and institutional hesitancy. Still, Reeves had made his choice. Integrity and truth would guide his next steps. He convened a private briefing with senior officers responsible for the investigation. Carter presented the footage and explained its significance. There was an initial wave of skepticism, some murmurs questioning the clarity of the audio and the partial nature of the video. But Reeves stood firm. "This is the evidence we need," he said, his voice calm, commanding. "It shows intent, communication, and action under extreme conditions. Chief Mercer acted as any officer should when lives were at stake." The board listened quietly, some exchanging glances that carried unspoken acknowledgement of the truth they had overlooked. The room was tense, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Reeves understood that this evidence could not just exonerate Mercer, it could rewrite the narrative of that mission entirely. Yet he also knew the scrutiny would be intense. Critics would question motivations, chain of command, and even his own role in defending Mercer publicly. The stakes were high, but so was the moral imperative. While the Pentagon debated the procedural implications, Marines who had been saved by Mercer began submitting additional testimonies. Their statements were detailed, emotionally charged, and unequivocal in their praise for his courage. Each report corroborated the footage, reinforcing the narrative Reeves had publicly championed at the ceremony. The young analyst, Carter, continued her work, cross-referencing communications logs, mission reports, and after-action notes. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Mercer had acted heroically, deliberately, and in alignment with the best values of the Navy. In the meantime, Reeves met with Mercer privately, a rare encounter under extraordinary circumstances. Mercer, calm yet visibly tense, listened as Reeves explained the situation. "They've reopened your file," Reeves said, "but we have something powerful now, evidence that speaks for itself. You acted under chaos with professionalism and courage. Nothing can diminish that." Mercer nodded, a mix of relief and anxiety crossing his face. The young sailor understood that vindication was not automatic. The wheels of bureaucracy moved slowly, and reputations were easily tainted. The next step was to prepare for the closed-door hearing. Reeves coordinated with legal teams, analysts, and key witnesses. The helmet footage would be presented, communications logs submitted, and testimonies verified. It was a meticulous process, designed to withstand every procedural challenge and bureaucratic objection. Every detail mattered. Every second could shift the outcome. Reeves understood the tension intimately. Decades of service had taught him that even undeniable truth could falter if it was not presented with clarity, credibility, and unassailable evidence. As the day of the hearing approached, anticipation grew. News of the Admiral's public defense of Mercer had already spread across secure Navy channels. Personnel throughout the ranks watched with interest and curiosity. Officers speculated about the potential outcome, while enlisted sailors whispered hope and admiration for their colleague. In every conversation, the empty chair from the ceremony became a symbol of courage, integrity, and the necessity of standing up for what is right, even in the face of scrutiny. Reeves remained resolute. He reviewed the evidence meticulously, rehearsed his statements, and prepared to testify under oath. He knew that the coming hearing would test not only Mercer's honor but his own judgment, leadership, and moral courage. Yet he was undeterred. The footage, the testimonies, and his own experience provided a solid foundation. The truth would speak louder than politics, protocol, or fear. Finally, on the eve of the hearing, Reeves allowed himself a moment to reflect. He thought of the lives Mercer had saved, the sacrifices he had made, and the integrity that had guided his every action. The empty chair, once a source of tension and anxiety, now symbolized the opportunity for justice, a chance to honor true heroism. Reeves knew the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges, skepticism, and resistance, but the truth had a power that could not be denied. And for the first time in months, he felt confident that justice would prevail. The day of the review board arrived. The room at the Pentagon was stark, cold, and silent, a sharp contrast to the grand, ceremonial halls of the Naval Academy. The chairs were arranged meticulously, with senior officers, legal advisors, and witnesses seated in tense anticipation. At the front sat the panel of admirals and officers who would determine the fate of Chief Petty Officer Daniel "Danny" Mercer. For hours, the weight of their scrutiny had loomed over him, and for months, the shadow of bureaucratic doubt had threatened to tarnish his honor. Vice Admiral Nathaniel Reeves stood near the back of the room, calm and composed but alert. He had spent days preparing for this moment, ensuring that every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every recording was properly documented and presented. Reeves understood that no display of authority could replace truth. Evidence was the only thing that could silence skepticism and validate heroism. The helmet camera footage, communications logs, and personal testimonies of rescued Marines were all ready to speak for themselves. Mercer entered the room quietly, his uniform immaculate, but there was a visible tension in his shoulders. He had been through investigations before, but this one carried extraordinary stakes. The mission for which he had been lauded, yet questioned, now hung in the balance of a panel of senior officers whose judgments would define the official record. The empty chair at the Naval Academy had been a symbolic start. This was the tangible reckoning. The hearing began with formal introductions and the reading of Mercer's service record. Reeves watched carefully, noting every subtle shift in the panel's expressions. Some faces were stoic, unreadable. Others betrayed fleeting curiosity or skepticism. The room was charged with anticipation. All at once, the session felt like a battlefield, where words, evidence, and reputation would clash under the unflinching eyes of command. Lieutenant Jasmine Carter, the young analyst who had uncovered the critical footage, presented her findings first. The helmet camera video played on a secure monitor for the panel. The image was grainy, smoke curling, and explosions punctuating the darkness, but Mercer's movements were unmistakable. He could be seen coordinating with the Marines, assisting the wounded, and moving decisively toward danger with measured precision. The audio, while static-filled, clearly captured Mercer requesting permission before returning into the heart of the mission. There was no denial, no hesitation, only courage and professionalism under fire. Reeves stepped forward after the footage, his voice firm, steady, and resolute. "Chief Mercer acted with integrity, courage, and selflessness," he stated. "If there was a failure during this mission, it was mine, not his. He acted decisively to save lives when communication lines were compromised and every other option had been exhausted." His words were precise, carrying the authority of a three-star admiral but also the moral weight of experience. There was no exaggeration, no embellishment, only the unvarnished truth. Witnesses followed, Marines who had survived the mission. Each recounted their experiences, describing the chaos, the danger, and Mercer's actions with unwavering consistency. Every testimony reinforced the footage, providing personal validation of the heroism that had been questioned. The panel listened, initially reserved, but slowly expressions softened. Eyebrows relaxed, posture adjusted, pens paused. One by one, the stories created a cohesive narrative that was impossible to ignore. Mercer had acted under extreme conditions to save lives, demonstrating initiative, courage, and loyalty that surpassed procedural expectations. The tension in the room was palpable. Some members of the panel exchanged subtle glances, questioning the implications for protocol and hierarchy. Could a sailor act independently without undermining command? Was Mercer's heroism enough to justify deviation from orders? Reeves anticipated these concerns and addressed them directly. In chaos, in fire, in situations where lives hang in the balance, courage is its own protocol. Chief Mercer's decisions preserved life and demonstrated leadership beyond rank. Hours passed. Questions were asked, clarifications provided. Every detail was scrutinized, from the timing of Mercer's movements to the communications logs, down to the reports filed immediately after the mission. The thoroughness was exhaustive, yet there was no counter-evidence, no contradiction, no challenge that could diminish the heroism laid bare by cameras, testimonies, and Reeves' steadfast support. Finally, after careful deliberation, the board returned. The room was silent as the lead admiral read the decision. All charges against Chief Petty Officer Daniel Mercer were dismissed. His actions were officially recognized as extraordinary initiative under combat conditions, and his record would reflect the full measure of his heroism. A collective breath seemed to pass through the room. Relief and quiet satisfaction replaced tension. Marines and officers who had been skeptical nodded in acknowledgement. The decision validated every statement Reeves had made, every minute of evidence, and every risk he had taken in publicly defending Mercer. The empty chair, which had symbolized absence, now seemed to carry honor itself, a reminder of courage rewarded at last. Reeves met Mercer privately afterward. The tension in the younger sailor's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. "Sir, you stood for me," Mercer said quietly, a mix of gratitude and humility. Reeves smiled faintly, placing a hand on Mercer's shoulder. "Leadership is about standing with your sailors," he said, "especially when no one else will. You did what was right, and now the world knows it." Mercer's relief was palpable, his eyes reflecting the weight lifted from his conscience. Outside, Marines and sailors spoke quietly of the decision, celebrating their colleagues' vindication. The ripple of support that had begun after Reeves' speech at the ceremony now culminated in official recognition. Social media within secure channels buzzed with admiration and pride. The Navy's values, courage, honor, and loyalty had been affirmed. That evening, as Reeves reflected on the day, he understood that heroism sometimes required defiance of convention, and leadership often demanded standing alone until the truth could be seen by all. Mercer's story, once threatened by scrutiny, had been restored. The Navy had acknowledged not just his bravery, but the importance of integrity and moral courage in the face of institutional pressure. The empty chair, now filled with recognition in every recounting of the mission, had become a symbol of triumph. It represented not just Mercer's redemption, but the power of truth and the responsibility of leaders to protect those who risk everything for others. Reeves knew that this story would resonate for years to come, inspiring sailors, officers, and future leaders to act with courage, even when doing so carried personal risk. For Mercer, the weight of doubt and accusation had lifted, replaced by the honor he had earned through selfless action. For Reeves, the victory was twofold: defending a hero and proving that integrity could triumph even in the labyrinth of bureaucracy and protocol. The storm had passed, justice had prevailed, and the Navy had witnessed courage in its purest form. Weeks later, the Naval Academy's ceremonial hall was once again alive with anticipation, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The tension of the previous event had been replaced by a quiet sense of expectation and pride. Families, officers, and guests filed in, their conversations filled with excitement. The chandeliers sparkled as sunlight poured through the high windows, casting golden reflections on the polished floors. Every detail, from the banners of honor to the crispness of uniforms, spoke of tradition and pride, but now there was a deeper, richer significance, one of justice restored. Chief Petty Officer Daniel "Danny" Mercer entered the hall at the front of the room, his posture proud, his uniform immaculate, and the weight of weeks of doubt lifted from his shoulders. Every eye was on him. Reeves watched quietly from the side, calm but vigilant, ready to intervene if protocol or politics threatened the ceremony again. But today, there was no need. Today, the Navy itself acknowledged what had always been true: Mercer's courage, his leadership, and his unwavering commitment to his comrades deserved celebration. The empty chair that had once symbolized absence now seemed almost mythical in memory. Reeves thought of the countless officers and families who had witnessed that absence, the conversations it had sparked, and the tension it had revealed. It had forced truth into the open, and now, filled by Mercer himself, it represented honor and vindication. Every medal, every honor displayed during the ceremony seemed to shine brighter, now backed by the full understanding of heroism earned under fire. As the master of ceremonies called Mercer forward, applause erupted, warm and sustained. Families rose in unison, officers clapped proudly, and the crowd's energy filled the room with a tangible, almost electric excitement. Reeves allowed a rare smile to cross his face. The recognition Mercer had earned was finally complete, and it had been fought for not just in the heat of combat, but in the quiet corridors of investigation and leadership. Reeves approached the podium alongside Mercer. He glanced at the young man, seeing the mixture of relief, humility, and pride in his eyes. "Today," Reeves began, his voice resonant and steady, "we honor Chief Petty Officer Daniel Mercer, a sailor whose courage and commitment saved lives when chaos reigned. He acted decisively, selflessly, and with unwavering integrity. And today, we acknowledge his heroism fully and without question." The applause rose again, louder, almost overwhelming. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for history. Reeves' words echoed through the hall, carrying weight beyond protocol or ceremony. They were a testament to leadership, to moral courage, and to the importance of standing for truth. Every face in the room reflected a shared recognition of values that went deeper than medals, orders, or hierarchy. Mercer accepted his commendation with quiet dignity. He shook hands with Reeves, who nodded firmly, a subtle affirmation that justice had been restored. The symbolism of the empty chair had finally been realized. Absence had become presence, doubt had become certainty, and a sailor's honor had been validated. Every Marine and officer present understood that this was not just a ceremony. It was a declaration of the principles that define the Navy: courage, loyalty, and integrity. After the formal presentation, Reeves and Mercer stepped aside, allowing families and fellow sailors to offer congratulations. The hall was filled with chatter, laughter, and the shared pride of those who understood the cost of heroism. Parents spoke quietly to their children, pointing out the bravery and dedication of those in uniform. Young officers discussed leadership, inspired by the example of both Mercer and Reeves. The ripple effect of courage and integrity extended far beyond the ceremony itself. Reeves found a quiet moment to reflect. The journey from the empty chair at the first ceremony to this moment of recognition had been arduous, marked by tension, bureaucracy, and risk. He thought of the responsibility of command, the weight of decisions that could alter lives, and the necessity of standing firm even when the institution seemed uncertain. Leadership, he realized, was not about maintaining appearances or following tradition blindly. It was about acting with conviction, protecting those who embody the values of service, and ensuring that truth is recognized even in the face of doubt. Mercer, standing nearby, caught Reeves' eye and nodded in silent gratitude. The young sailor had faced scrutiny, doubt, and the weight of an official investigation, yet he had emerged with his honor intact, his heroism unchallenged. Reeves understood that this was a moment that would inspire countless others, a reminder that courage, once proven, could not be diminished by fear or politics. As the ceremony concluded, Reeves lingered in the hall watching Mercer mingle with fellow sailors and families. The sense of accomplishment was quiet but profound. Every detail of the day, the medals, the speeches, the smiles, now carried deeper meaning. The empty chair had been filled not just by Mercer himself, but by the affirmation of values, the recognition of truth, and the acknowledgement that heroism deserves defense, no matter the risk. Outside, the sun began to set over the academy grounds. Its warm light reflected off the water and polished surfaces, casting long shadows that seemed to honor both the past and the present. Reeves looked toward the horizon, reflecting on the lessons learned. Courage is not just the act of facing danger, but also the act of defending truth. Leadership is not just the exercise of authority, but the moral responsibility to stand for what is right. For Mercer, the journey from doubt to recognition had ended. For Reeves, the satisfaction came from knowing he had fulfilled his duty, not only to the Navy, but to the ideals that made it strong. The empty chair, once a symbol of tension and absence, now stood as a testament to justice, integrity, and the enduring power of heroism. As the hall emptied, Reeves walked slowly past the chairs, his gaze lingering on the place where the story had begun. The echoes of applause and recognition still vibrated through the room, and in that quiet moment, he knew that both Mercer and the Navy had emerged stronger, proof that honor, courage, and truth would always find their place, even amidst the complexities of service and sacrifice. The ceremony ended, but the story would live on, a tale of bravery, leadership, and the profound impact of standing up for what is right. And somewhere in the hearts of every sailor present that day, the empty chair would remain a symbol, reminding them that true courage is recognized, defended, and never forgotten.